Well, it's the end of April. May's right around the corner. You're talking about you're like in farmer mode right now. We're getting
Yeah.
getting ready to be in farmer mode. What are some whitetail projects that maybe someone just picked up a new piece, or maybe they have a lease, or maybe they have grandma's farm down the road? What are some things they can be doing in the month of May to prepare for this upcoming season?
Um, that time of year, most people won't historically think of doing that. But if you have the ability to, once those trees have leafed out completely, like most people try to do their in timber, like bedding spots, like hinge cutting and stuff. We'll reserve the actual true bedding areas, like literally where we want them to bed specifically. If it's real wide open timber, we'll cut that in actually in May. And the reason being, when those trees are leafed out already, they're going to provide that much more cover on the ground instantly.
Hmm.
So that it's definitely not too late to do some small hinge cutting, some bedding area plots like that. Other than that, on the true whitetail stuff, I mean, we'd be done with burning by then. We're primarily just planning all our summer plot. We'll be planning all our what I would call summer plots. They may, if they make it, if they're beans and stuff, they'll go right on through. But
Hmm.
it's definitely not too late to plant, native grasses either. I
Hmm.
think a lot of people plant on the early side and they don't manage what's there, the vegetation. If there's brome grass there, they need to get that killed first. I'd rather have all the weeds and grasses up out of the ground, do my final spraying, and even if I have to plant into May. The other thing someone could do, and again, this depends if it's a permission farm or if it's a owned or managed property. I'd say early to mid May is probably the prime time to plant miscanthus. We've got
Okay.
I've got a bag of 5,000 I think coming here. Should be here by the end of the week. So
Do you use a tree planter for that when
yeah,
you
I've
plant
done it
those?
both ways. We've done it. We did some of it if it gets too muddy by hand, but the best results we have and the by far the fastest is a small tractor pulled tree planter. That works the
Mhm.
best. And then just managing it, managing the vegetation and using pre-emergence and stuff beyond that. So
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, it's like almost like just the whitetail calendar is so sporadic to where it's
it
like
is.
you have to get this stuff done in this 3-week period, and then you have to get this stuff done in this 3-week
Yep.
period, and it's
Yep.
easy to you can't really get ahead on some of that stuff like you're talking about, like people jumping the gun on planning things too early because they're excited and not doing the pre-management well enough. What's a hard lesson you learned when it came to whitetail projects where if someone calls you like, "Hey, I'm thinking about doing this," and you're like, "No, no, 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 don't do that. I've done that and it does not work."
Well, the I've got two, and I've got one which is a very current mistake that I just made that I'm still not 100% sure of the outcome or what we're going to do. So that one's unique. But the biggest mistake I see is what you said with people jumping the gun. They're so excited. I don't care what it is, whether it's prairie grass, planting clover, planting trees. They're so excited for the planting, they don't do the prep and getting it killed. Getting whatever the vegetation that's already established there completely killed, even if it means skipping a year, doing a fall spraying to get that sod killed good. So you're going into a clean seed bed. I'd say 90% of the prairie grass, specifically prairie grass failures that I see are due to lack of proper site prep. So,
Mhm.
yeah,
Do you think it's possible for someone right now, April 25th, to have a prayer? But right now it's brome. Is there any way that you think that they could still plant it this year, like spray it twice and then drill it in, or do you think that's not wise? Because native grasses, it's expensive seed.
it's expensive seed. If, without knowing the site conditions, we actually got tasked with that exact problem last year. And what happened was a small area had gotten missed in the fall spraying, and it was a CP42 CRP project, expensive seed. FSA wasn't going to allow it to be planted, and I mean, this was a big project, and this little area wasn't 3 or 4 acres. And I came up with a solution, and when I did, their jaw dropped. You know what I mean? Because
Mm.
they didn't know what to say. They eventually let us do it. But what we did, and this goes totally against the way you kill sod in the spring is with a moldboard plow.
Okay. Yep.
We literally plowed it. Like Yeah, literally flipped it over, made it dirt, disked it back down to dirt, planted it, and it came out beautiful. But
It's
that wasn't in their playbook of normal techniques to plant prairie grass. But in this instance, it provided an instant termination of whatever crop was there. So, which was just brome grass. And in that case, it's doing better than the part that we no-tilled, had sprayed in the fall and everything else. So that's
interesting.
just something to think about. So,
Yeah.
and the way I picked up on that is I've had people or seen projects where people are hardcore like organic that are not going to spray, and that leaves them no other choice but to use mechanical means to terminate whatever's there. So
hmm do you think it's probably not feasible to spray like spray today, for example, and then spray in 2 weeks and then drill it in like the third week of May or last week of May?
if it was just prairie grass, like, or say just switchgrass, I
Hmm.
think you could do it because you do have enough chemical choices out there. If you sprayed it, mowed it short, let it green a little, sprayed it, waited 2 or 3 more weeks, hopefully get another little flush of grass and weeds, sprayed it again, but on that spraying, used a full rate, whatever's legal in your counties, of atrazine, or if
Hmm.
you can't get that, use simazine or something. I've seen that push through, and then you'd have to be really diligent and probably come back behind it with quinclorac,
Hmm.
which is something that will kill grass in established grasses. So you'd have your work cut out for you, but that would be like a rescue type planning, I would call it.
Hmm.
Um, but it's far harder than just doing it where you get a fall kill of everything and then go in and plant. So
Hmm.
now,
Okay.
cropland, if it had been cropped in the past, I wouldn't hesitate at all.
Hmm.
It's usually the brome or pasture type grass that we struggle with, the brome and fescue,
Hmm.
or orchard grass. Orchard, reeds, canary, those are all ones that are pretty tenacious.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there any other projects that you've done over the years that were just complete failures and
Well,
you I mean there's a bunch I'm sure, but
well, this is one that the verdict is out on, and this is the one where I said I might have just made a pretty big error. And about 2 weeks ago, it was a farm you and I went to. We drove by it. We didn't have any cameras out there. It was a brand new project for us,
Mhm.
and had a big, beautiful pond on it. And the landowner was like, "Hey, we should plant some thermal cover here." So he put this whole tree plan together, and I said, "I'll help you do it." So we sprayed it last fall, burned it, sprayed our strips, burned the whole area, um, and then went back, planted 500 white pines and white spruce, and tubed them all. Tubed it. I mean, it looks like Arlington Cemetery. It's beautiful. So I put a post to doing it on my Instagram,
Uh-huh.
and somebody hit me right back, and they said, "I don't think you can tube conifers.
Mhm.
They're going to die." And I'm like, we didn't think of that. We just spent a day and a half putting
Tubing.
tubes on 500 trees. And so I called, my fiance has a forestry degree. My brother has a forestry degree. I asked them, and they didn't know. So I actually reached out to Skip. He wasn't 100% sure. And then I reached out to our state forester, and he said he's seen it go both ways. He's seen the tubes help them. He said it would have been better to cage them,
Sure.
but than it would be
Five
to.
500 metal cages.
Well, that's it. Now we're sitting there like, what are we gonna do? So we're gonna keep an eye on it. Yeah. So like I said, you're never done learning. So, and I
Yeah.
appreciate somebody reaching out to me on Instagram and questioning what we were doing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, for sure. Because I imagine, yeah, it's probably something you probably can't is the goal just to have them tubed for a year or 2 and then pull them off after they get established, or is it
that
the hope to
was
let them shoot all the way up?
yeah. Well, the problem is, you're co- compared to hardwoods, your conifers are going to grow out as much as they're going to grow up when they're little, and I think that's where you run into the problem.
Mhm.
So in my mind, we're going to have to replace the tubes with cages at some point. So um, this is a pretty remote farm, so I kind of want to let it go a little while and just see, hey, do we have enough moisture? Is this tree planting going to be a success? You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And then say, okay, we think we have an 80% survival rate. So go back out there and we'll pull the tubes off and cage the remaining 400 survivors. So,
Mhm.
but
Yeah, that tree plantings are always interesting because
yeah,
there's
they're
so many
just,
things that can go against you, and there seems like there's less that can go for you.
it really is. It's, when we help a new landowner, somebody that's bought a farm through us, and we're laying out the plan, and we do the kind of the consulting, if you will, and the projects normally. So
Mhm.
we're involved in both sides of it. But if we do that, I explain to people, for the time and the money, we got to do that's a micro. Tree planting in my mind is a micro project. We got to take care of all the macro projects, because 9 out of 10 times you're going to get less return on a tree planting, less bang for your buck on the habitat net than you will on almost any other project.
Mhm. That's interesting. Yeah, so meaning like TSI,
Yeah.
invasive species
Yep.
removal, putting in food plots,
Yep.
improving access, all those
Yeah.
different things.
Yep.
Yep.
Those things are all going to help the farm far greater sooner than a tree planting, you
Yeah.
know, and that's why, like in this instance, this landowner, he wanted to do 5,000 trees. I'm like, no way. If you do, get some new friends, because and then he saw how much it costs
Yeah.
and to do it correctly. And so he's like, okay. And I said, we just, on a farm like this, if we do 500 a year, eventually we'll have a nice stand.
Yep.
If we do 5,000 one year and we get a drought like last summer, we'll have zero, literally zero,
Yeah.
and we'll be doing it again. I said I'd rather keep adding to what we got than going all in one year. So
Yeah. I'll tell you what I did last year for I planted cedars in white pine, and I didn't want to cage. I think I planted 300 or 400 of them, and I just put up there's an existing fence line, and then I fenced in like a 4.5, 5 foot fence with T posts all the way around it.
oh wow,
And I'm thinking, okay, because it was, let's say 40 yards wide and 120 yards long. So I just fenced all that in, hoping that that would relieve browse pressure.
sure,
It did good for a long time. Then I went out there after deer season. Every one of the tops,
yep,
it didn't work.
yep,
It kept them out of it for a while, but then you know a herd of 15 does one
yep.
night can cause all that damage. And so
I
I
did.
would recommend that.
This is a unique one too. We do a lot of equip contract projects, and one thing we've started to do is we do right up against the drip line of the trees. We'll plant a few rows of shrubs,
Mm,
you know, and then we drop all the trees on top of them,
yep.
trying to provide sort of a natural barrier for the deer. And I sat during gun season last year. I was sitting at my place in a shooting house. Really, out there was no deer specifically I was after. It was more just observation. And there was one doe that was just did never came to the food plot, but was working through those cut treetops just to get to those shrubs that we planted. So
Wow.
it's like you almost can't win.
Yeah.
It's crazy between the droughts and everything else. I think if I did another big tree planting, I it, and I would do it more in blocks than in rows. I think I would electric fence it. I think
Mhm.
cost and time. I think I could manage an electric fence probably better than anything else, and it would also not make. Um, we wouldn't have the problem of the tubes, the trees growing into the tubes and the cost of the tubes and everything else.
Yeah,
So
that's a really good piece of advice. Yeah, I
yeah,
mean, I'm planting 2,800 trees this year. I have 1,500 left, and I'm tubing half of them. I tubed 100% of my trees last year, not the conifers, but tubed 100% of them last year. And it takes a long time. It takes a long
it
time to
does.
plant them, and then it takes a long time to tube them all. So I did
Yep.
half. But electric fence would make a lot of sense if you can just even if you did a unit of them where you
Right.
for sure wanted them to grow, and if
Yep.
the other ones get browsed.
Yep.
Um, this is a debate I've been having mentally, and even with some people here. It's there's a lot of people that honeysuckle specifically to where they say it's great cover. The deer, do eat it, and I put that in air quotes there. But I planted shrubs last weekend, and then I haven't put tubes on them, and I have some young honeysuckle. All the shrubs I planted, and even the young trees, already are getting nipped like crazy, but they haven't touched any honeysuckle, and it's like if it was so good, there wouldn't be the crazy regeneration of honeysuckle if the deer actually browse it. Because I've planted, I think I'm up to 4,800 trees and shrubs I planted at my
Right.
house, and if they're not tubed, they're gone, or they're still the same exact size of when I planted one 3 years ago.
Right. I would say if your deer, I've seen very little to almost no. utilization of honeysuckle from a browse standpoint. I would think if you were in an area and you had a property where they were utilizing honeysuckle, it's a really bad property. Like they're
It's a good
starving.
way to
You
put
know what I
it.
mean? Like that's one step above eating the rocks and sticks. That's
Yeah.
yeah, that would be my thing. My big farm in Appanoose County has tons of honeysuckle. It's actually kind of a negative. It's one of the real negatives. You and I, that one day with Richard, we
Hmm.
walked a piece that I was marking some white oaks to cut,
Yeah.
and that piece, before we did any cutting, and we still haven't, we didn't have cost share money. We just did it. We cut and sprayed all the honeysuckle that we could find, and it's crazy this spring how many more there are. And just to get back to your point, there is almost no natural white oak regeneration, and
Mm.
the honeysuckle, and because of deer browse, and we have crazy amounts of honeysuckle invasive in invading that forest. So yeah,
Mhm.
I would say that. On the other hand, if your farm has no other cover, if you don't have much cover, I would go slowly on removing the honeysuckle because it is good. You know what I mean? It does provide cover at the right height for deer. There's
Mhm.
no doubt about that. So
Yeah, it's definitely a debate. And there was a couple of years ago, it was when we had a really bad winter, which has been a while, obviously. And this was mainly a CRP farm with no food on it. And there was cedars along the fence line, and you get to see the browse line on the cedars. And I'm like, those poor deer.
yeah, they're really hurting if they're eating cedars. I
Yeah.
mean, eastern red cedars. When you go north, I'd say the Minneapolis area north, they love white cedar. If you
Mm.
have true northern white cedar, that those lakes up there all have major browse lines, and it's pretty interesting from that standpoint. But yeah, it's very rare that they eat those eastern red cedars, but they will if they have to.
Hmm. Let's rank some projects. So I'm gonna rattle off five as many whitetail projects as I can think of in my top of my head, and rank them in terms of priority. So we're
Sure.
gonna we're gonna do uh, TSI, tree planting, food plots, screening, and we'll do those four. We're and then a fruit tree planting because people love planting fruit trees. So we have fruit trees, traditional tree shrub planting, TSI, screening, and I don't remember what the fifth one was. So I
Food
don't expect you.
plots, or
Food plots, yes, yep,
yeah.
food plots. How would you rank? You have 1 year. Which ones are you knocking out because you can't do all of them 1 year?
I would probably put the TSI at the top of my list. The TSI would be the very top of my list. Um, and again, each property is going to have specific challenges, but so I'm speaking pretty generally. But I would put TSI at the top of the list, followed probably second by food plots because you've got to have some food. Third, it would be a toss up based on screening. If the farm really needed screening, meaning like from the road screening, then I would place that there. If it was more just screening for access, you know, I
Mhm,
would I'd still probably say that would be my number four choice, or number three choice. Three or four would be screening and tree planting, depending on what, that would be a very farm specific
mhm,
one. My last choice would be fruit tree planting. That would be, and I've done a lot of it, and I've not been super successful at it. And I've been like, through our real estate business and everything else, I'm literally on farms every single day. And
mhm,
I'd say if you get in South Central Iowa and it's a farm that has been a hunting farm for a while, chances are it has what I call an apple tree graveyard. And what they consist of is, some kind of mesh, some kind of cages, this nice little planting, and all dead trees.
mhm,
Like, they are an immense amount of work to keep going. And that's the negative side. Now if it happens to be where it borders your home farm and you have the ability to do the wintertime dormant spraying, and do the pruning and keep the cages up, and then still accept you're going to lose a fairly high percentage through just droughts and bugs. And we have with cedar apple rust is another challenge for our fruit trees. Those are all things that make it that. The other thing I would say, I have never seen or directly talked to somebody that I know that said, "Oh man, that big buck that I've been after, he finally came into the apple trees and I shot him." I've never seen that happen, never.
yeah,
So if that's, so if you're prioritizing, if you have a farm that everything else is keyed up and you really like that, or it's close to your house and you want to plant some fruit trees, that'd be great. But that should be probably the very last thing. Like,
Mhm.
to me, and again, it's what everybody likes. Typically, though, fruit trees don't do well in this part of Iowa. I know when I go to, like Wisconsin or go back east, you find old farmsteads
Yep.
and they've overgrown, abandoned, and there's apple trees everywhere. Like that is very rare in Iowa. So,
Mhm.
and in this part of Iowa, and I don't know why that is. Like
Yeah.
there's just some challenges with the soils or droughts or whatever that take them out. So,
I can't remember where I read this or heard this. I wanna say in some parts of the country, it was required if you homesteaded, you had to plant X amount of apple trees.
oh, that's cool.
And so I
That
think that's
was,
like in Pennsylvania or some of these other states
yeah,
where you
yep,
find them randomly. It is those old homesteads like you mentioned.
yep.
Yeah, so maybe that wasn't a rule in Iowa
No, it
in the
definitely wasn't.
1800s.
If they had a rule, if they made a rule in Iowa, it's to cut trees down and get rid of them. The
Plant
average
much more.
Iowa mindset is not tree friendly. So,